Thank you, noble ancestors. You have saved this unworthy one.
Hello guys, welcome back. Now, most cartoons that reach the end of their run at least try to tell viewers that the journey is over. Maybe the heroes win one final battle. Maybe a long-time villain is permanently defeated. Or perhaps the characters gather for one last goodbye before the credits roll. Now, the original Jonny Quest did none of those things. When people look back at animated television from the 1960s, Jonny Quest stands out for several reasons. It was more serious than most American cartoons of its era. It featured genuine danger, realistically proportioned human characters, international espionage, firearms, monsters, and stories that often felt closer to adventure films than ordinary children's animation. It also influenced generations of artists and helped prove that television animation could handle action, suspense, science fiction, and globe-trotting adventure. But despite its importance, the original series received one of the least conclusive endings imaginable. After 26 episodes involving spies, lost civilizations, hostile armies, monsters, and scientific mysteries, the show simply stopped. There was no grand finale. There was no final confrontation with Dr. Zinn. There was no emotional farewell. There was only one more adventure, which happened to become the last episode of the original run. The series hadn't been structured around a long story that required a planned conclusion. The possibility of producing more episodes also appears to have remained open until financial realities made another season impractical. So, how exactly did the original Jonny Quest end? What happened during its final episode? Why did the show stop after only one season? And how did a series consisting of just 26 original episodes survive for more than 60 years through reruns, television movies, comics, and reboots? Well, let's find out.
Looking for these? Why, you?
A serious show in a slapstick world. Jonny Quest premiered in primetime on ABC on September 18th, 1964. At the time, Hanna-Barbera was already one of the most important animation studios in American television. The company had produced popular shows, including The Flintstones, The Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, and The Quick Draw McGraw Show. Most of these productions were built around comedy. They relied on funny dialogue, repeating character routines, and limited animation techniques designed to keep television production affordable. Jonny Quest moved in a very different direction. The show followed Jonny Quest, the young son of brilliant scientist Dr. Benton Quest. Traveling with them was Roger Race Bannon, a highly trained government agent assigned to protect Jonny and serve as his tutor and bodyguard. The group also included Haji Singh, Jonny's adopted brother and closest friend, along with Bandit, a family's small bulldog. Every episode took them somewhere different. One week, they might investigate a monster in a jungle. The following week, they could be traveling beneath the ocean, trapped inside an enemy facility, exploring ancient ruins, or uncovering an international conspiracy. The characters had more realistic physical proportions than those found in most Hanna-Barbera comedies. The villains carried weapons. People were kidnapped, threatened, injured, and sometimes killed. The stories were still designed for a family audience, but the danger was rarely treated as a complete joke. Much of that tone came from Doug Wildey. Before working on Jonny Quest, Wildey had built a career as a comic book and comic strip artist. His work brought a pulp adventure sensibility to the series. Wildey drew inspiration from adventure movies, radio serials, and newspaper strips, particularly Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates. He also recalled that Joseph Barbera wanted the new cartoon to capture some of the excitement surrounding James Bond. Wildey said that Barbera encouraged him to watch Dr. No because he wanted that kind of action-adventure feeling. The result was a series that felt like several forms of entertainment combined. It had the composition of a comic strip, the pace of a spy thriller, the imagination of a pulp magazine, and the scope of an adventure movie. Wildey also explained that his goal was to create characters and images people would remember. He tried to incorporate the things that had fascinated him as a child, and viewers certainly remembered them. They remember the robot spy, the invisible energy monster, giant creatures, hidden laboratories, the deadly Dr. Zinn, and Race Bannon throwing punches with more force than audiences expected from a television cartoon. Everything about Jonny Quest was intended to feel larger and more cinematic than the studio's ordinary comedy output. Ironically, That ambition contributed to the reason it lasted only one original season. A series with detailed designs, elaborate environments, complicated action, and new locations in almost every episode was expensive to produce. But while the financial questions developed behind the scenes, the creative team focused on producing 26 memorable adventure stories. One season, 26 episodes, and no plan for an ending. Modern audiences are accustomed to television seasons building toward finales. Characters change over time, mysteries develop gradually. Villains remain active across multiple seasons until a final confrontation brings everything together. That was not how the original Jonny Quest operated. The series was created as a collection of largely self-contained adventures. Each episode introduced a new mystery, mission, invention, villain, or supernatural-looking threat. The Quest team investigated. Danger followed. The mystery was solved. Then, the following week, a completely different adventure began. There was no season-long plot connecting all 26 episodes. Jonny was not slowly growing into adulthood. Race Bannon was not working toward retirement. Dr. Quest was not pursuing one scientific objective that would finally be completed in the last episode. The format was intentionally flexible. Viewers could watch an episode without knowing everything that happened previously. That structure was common in 1960s television. Networks wanted programs that could be repeated, syndicated, and watched out of sequence. Audiences might miss several episodes and return without feeling completely lost. Jonny Quest followed that approach. The production was therefore not moving toward one predetermined final chapter. The show's use of Dr. Zinn illustrates this clearly. Today, Dr. Zinn is remembered as the Quest family's greatest enemy. However, he didn't appear every week during the original season, nor did his schemes form one continuous storyline. He was a recurring villain who appeared when a particular story required him. The original series never promised that all of its adventures were leading toward one final battle against him. Had the show continued, he likely would have returned. The same applies to the heroes. The series never seriously explored what Jonny hoped to become when he grew older. It didn't ask whether Haji eventually wanted a life outside the Quest family's expeditions. It didn't reveal whether Race imagined a future beyond his government assignment. Those were not questions the original format was attempting to answer. Its primary goal was adventure. Because of that, the ending of the series wasn't driven by storytelling. It was created by the end of production. When The Sea Haunt aired in March 1965, viewers saw an ordinary Jonny Quest adventure. ABC aired episode 26, The Sea Haunt, on March 11, 1965. Today, it's remembered as the final episode of the original series, but nothing about it identifies it as a planned finale. There's no special opening. There's no returning characters from across the season. There's no emotional speech about the Quest family's future. There's no final appearance by Dr. Zinn. Instead, The Sea Haunt plays exactly like another self-contained adventure. The story begins when the Quest party responds to trouble at sea and becomes stranded aboard an apparently abandoned freighter. The missing crew and the condition of the vessel create the atmosphere of a ghost story. As the group investigates, Jonny and Haji discover coffins stored in the ship's hold. The coffins appear disturbing, but they actually conceal a valuable cargo of gold. A dangerous amphibious creature is also roaming the ship. The monster appears to be responsible for the crew's disappearance and becomes an immediate threat to the Quest team. The episode combines several genres that the series used particularly well. It begins like a maritime mystery. It develops into a haunted ship story. Then, it becomes a creature feature involving a monster stalking the characters through an isolated location. The heroes must discover what happened, avoid the creature, and survive long enough to escape. Eventually, the threat is overcome, and the mystery surrounding the freighter is resolved. Then, the episode ends. There's no farewell. There's no indication that Jonny, Haji, Race, Dr. Quest, and Bandit have completed their last mission. The characters don't know that the audience won't receive another original adventure the following week, and that's why The Sea Haunt feels so strange when viewed as a series ending. It wasn't a finale disguised as a normal adventure. It was a normal adventure that later became the finale because no second season was produced.
You have learned the power source, the range limitations and circuitry.
The ending by omission. What Jonny Quest never showed. One of the most interesting things about the ending of Jonny Quest is not what happened, It's what never happened. Modern finales are often expected to answer important questions. Characters complete their journeys. Relationships are resolved. Villains receive permanent defeats. Long-running mysteries finally receive explanations. The original Jonny Quest does none of that. When the credits roll on the Seahawk, almost every major element of the series remains exactly where it was before the adventure began. Jonny is still a young boy traveling the world with his father. Dr. Quest remains an important scientist whose inventions and research attract dangerous enemies. Race Bannon remains the family's bodyguard, tutor, and primary action hero. Haji remains Johnny's adopted brother and closest companion. Bandit remains ready to wander into trouble during the next mission. Nothing is brought to a definitive conclusion. We never see Jonny grow older. Would he eventually become a scientist like his father? Would he follow Race Bannon into intelligence or security work? Would he reject both paths and seek adventures on his own terms? The original series never answers those questions. Dr. Benton Quest also remains somewhat mysterious. We know that he's a brilliant researcher who works with the United States government and other international organizations. His inventions are important enough to attract spies, criminals, and hostile governments. But the original cartoon doesn't deeply explore his personal life. It rarely examines how he balances being a scientist with being a father. It also never seriously asks whether bringing Jonny on such dangerous missions is responsible parenting. From a realistic perspective, the answer would probably be no. Jonny is kidnapped, attacked, chased by armed criminals, trapped in hostile environments, and threatened by monsters. But within the logic of the show, adventure is simply part of the family's life. Race Bannon also receives little detailed backstory. He's exceptionally capable. He can fly aircraft, operate advanced technology, fight trained enemies, and survive almost any dangerous situation. But the original series never gives viewers an extended account of his earlier career or the missions that turned him into such an effective operative. Haji's background is also only partially explored. The series establishes that he's an orphan from Calcutta who saves Dr. Quest and becomes part of the family. He's intelligent, courageous, resourceful, and occasionally demonstrates unusual abilities. But much of his life before meeting the Quests remains unexplained. Then there's Dr. Zinn. If any villain appears suitable for a final confrontation, it's him. He becomes the franchise's most recognizable antagonist and repeatedly uses science, espionage, and technology against Dr. Quest. But the original series never built toward his ultimate defeat. The Seahawk doesn't feature him. There's no episode in which the Quest team destroys his organization forever. His conflict with the heroes simply remains available for another story. For modern viewers, that can feel incomplete. But for a highly episodic 1960s program, it was normal. The goal was not to sell one enormous 26-part story. The goal was to tell 26 individual adventures. The show's ending was therefore not a narrative ending. It was simply the point at which production stopped. Too expensive to continue. Why the original series stopped. If Jonny Quest was memorable and well regarded, then why did it not continue immediately? The most firmly documented answer is cost. From the beginning, Jonny Quest was among Hanna-Barbera's most ambitious television projects. The studio was famous for developing limited animation techniques that made weekly television cartoons affordable. Characters might move while backgrounds remained still. Walk cycles and other movement could be reused. Sets could return frequently. Jonny Quest could still use limited animation, but its genre demanded far more visual variety. One episode might require jungles, submarines, aircraft, temples, islands, laboratories, mountains, ancient ruins, or futuristic machinery. The human designs were detailed. The action required careful staging. The atmosphere depended on dramatic lighting, convincing environments, and compositions that resembled adventure comics. Producing that material cost more than producing a comedy built around recurring domestic settings. Accounts from people involved with Hanna-Barbera indicate that ABC considered continuing the program. According to animation artist and studio executive Ueo Takamoto, William Hanna prepared estimates for another season and presented them to the network. ABC ultimately declined to order more episodes at the required cost. Doug Wildey later described the problem in similar terms. He recalled being told that the studio couldn't afford to continue producing the show at that level unless the client covered the additional expense. That support didn't arrive, so the series ended. This doesn't necessarily mean that Jonny Quest was considered a complete failure. It means that its financial requirements were difficult to justify within 1960s television economics. Estimates published later have suggested that an episode cost substantially more than the studio's standard animated productions. The realistic designs and cinematic ambition that made Jonny Quest special were also the things that made it difficult to maintain. The original draft also connected the cancellation to ratings, ABC's position among the networks, complaints about violence, and disputes involving Doug Wildey's credit. Those issues require more caution. Jonny Quest certainly contained more realistic violence than most animated programs of its era. Villains used guns, people died, children were placed in genuine danger. Public concern about violence in children's television grew during the late 1960s, but the clearest surviving explanation for why no immediate second season was produced is the cost. Likewise, Wildey did have disagreements over recognition and ownership. The series eventually credited him with the wording based on an idea created by Doug Wildey. However, there's not enough evidence to state that the credit dispute directly caused ABC to reject another season. The safest conclusion is simple. The show was visually ambitious and unusually expensive. Hanna-Barbera and ABC discussed continuing it. The numbers didn't work. After 26 episodes, production stopped. The reruns that kept it alive. Many television shows disappear after cancellation. Jonny Quest did not. One could argue that the franchise became even more important after its original ABC run ended. The existing episodes continued appearing in reruns. Children who had been too young to watch the original primetime broadcasts discovered the series later. Then, another generation found it, and another after that. The original episodes eventually appeared across all three major American television networks through different rerun packages. The series aired on CBS on Saturday mornings and later returned to ABC before also appearing on NBC. That level of exposure kept it visible long after production had stopped. Its structure helped enormously. Because the episodes were self-contained, they could be broadcast in almost any order. The Sea Haunt did not announce itself as a finale. There was no concluding storyline that made the other episodes feel outdated once viewers had seen it. To a child discovering the series through reruns, the Quest family's adventures seemed endless. The show also aged surprisingly well. Technology changed, and some portrayals reflected stereotypes from the period, but the central appeal remained strong. Monsters, secret laboratories, hostile spies, lost cities, dangerous inventions, and exotic missions don't easily go out of fashion. The series later found new life on cable channels, including USA Network, Cartoon Network, and Boomerang. For many viewers growing up decades after 1965, Jonny Quest didn't feel like a failed one-season program. It felt as though it were a permanent piece of adventure television. The original run was short. Its rerun life was enormous. Without syndication, the show might have become a respected but obscure experiment. Instead, it became a franchise. Revivals, reboots, and the quest that kept returning. The first major animated revival arrived in 1986, more than 20 years after the original series premiered. The New Adventures of Jonny Quest produced 13 new episodes for syndication. The fundamental formula remained familiar. Johnny, Haji, Dr. Quest, Race Bannon, and Bandit continued traveling the world and confronting scientific, criminal, and supernatural-looking threats. Dr. Zinn also returned. The revival was not a direct sequel to the plot of The Sea Haunt. It didn't begin by explaining what happened immediately after the abandoned freighter. Instead, it resumed the classic adventure format, as though the Quest team had continued taking missions during the years audiences hadn't seen them. Expanded again with the 1993 television movie Johnny's Golden Quest. The film introduced Jessie Bannon, Race Bannon's daughter, and again used Dr. Zinn as the central threat. Jessie's introduction expanded the team and gave Johnny and Haji another young character to interact with. 2 years later came Jonny Quest versus the Cyber Insects. The 1995 television movie continued the classic version of the characters and again placed them against Dr. Zinn. It became the last major animated production using that particular classic configuration before the franchise underwent a much larger transformation. In 1996, The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest premiered. The new series aged Jonny and Haji into teenagers and made Jesse Bannon a permanent member of the core team. It introduced updated technology and used computer-generated animation for sequences taking place inside Quest World, a virtual reality environment. The show was not simply another batch of episodes made exactly like the 1964 series. It modernized the premise, character designs, relationships, and technology for a 1990s audience. The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest ultimately produced 52 episodes before ending in 1997. Its existence demonstrated the durability of the central concept. A boy adventurer, a brilliant scientist, an elite bodyguard, and a group of friends traveling into danger could be reinvented for another generation. The franchise continued appearing in crossovers, home media releases, comics, and proposed film projects. Every few years, someone found a reason to bring Jonny Quest back. Most cancelled programs eventually fade from public memory. Jonny repeatedly returned. From Comico to Dynamite, television was not the only medium in which the Quest team continued its adventures. The franchise also developed an important comic book history. Comico began publishing an ongoing Jonny Quest series in 1986. The main run reached 31 issues between 1986 and 1988. The comic gave writers and artists room to tell stories that could have been difficult or expensive to produce in animation. It could explore new locations, expand relationships, introduce villains, and build longer plots without the limitations of a weekly television budget. Doug Wildey himself contributed to the comics, helping connect the publication to the spirit of the original series. Comico later experienced serious financial problems, and its Jonny Quest publishing program ended. But the series proved that interest in the Quest family remained strong more than 2 decades after the television debut. One of the most interesting later developments arrived in 2024. Dynamite Entertainment launched a new Jonny Quest comic, written by Joe Casey and illustrated by Sebastian Perez. The project used the designs, atmosphere, and general continuity of the classic cartoon rather than completely reinventing the characters. Casey explained that the creative team was approaching the material seriously and taking the original concept largely at face value. The publication began with a free comic book day prelude before the regular first issue arrived in August 2024. Its story used the original era as a starting point before sending the Quest family into a time displacement adventure involving a world filled with unfamiliar technology and new dangers. The team eventually faced Dr. Zinn as it attempted to understand what had happened and find a way home. The regular series ran for 5 issues. Dynamite promoted issue 5 as the finale of that particular Boy Out of Time storyline. It shouldn't automatically be treated as an official continuation of the animated television canon. Comics and television adaptations often occupy their own versions of continuity. However, it deliberately continued the visual and narrative spirit of the original cartoon. Nearly 60 years after The Sea Haunt, creators were still imagining what the Quest family's next mission might look like. That is remarkable for a show whose original run lasted only 1 season.
Closer! Try to keep him off with that torch!
So, how did the original Jonny Quest actually end? After all of this, well, what's the direct answer? How did the original Jonny Quest end? Technically, it ended on March 11th, 1965, with the broadcast of The Sea Haunt. In that episode, the Quest party became trapped aboard an abandoned freighter. They discovered coffins containing a valuable shipment of gold and encountered a deadly amphibious sea monster connected to the disappearance of the crew. The heroes survived the threat, solved the mystery, and completed another mission. Then, the credits rolled. That was the end of the original series. There was no final battle with Dr. Zinn. There was no farewell scene. Nobody reflected on the previous 25 adventures. No character announced that the team was separating. The Quest family simply completed another assignment. The real ending took place behind the scenes. The series was expensive to produce. Hanna-Barbera explored the possibility of another season, but ABC didn't order more episodes at the required cost. Production ended. So, the original Jonny Quest didn't conclude because its story had reached a natural end point. It concluded because another season was not financially approved. Yet, that unfinished quality eventually became one of the franchise's strengths. Nothing had been permanently resolved. Jonny had not completed his journey. Dr. Zinn had not been defeated forever. The Quest team had not retired. The door remained open for future television producers, comic writers, and filmmakers to invent another adventure. In that sense, Jonny Quest survived partly because it never received a definitive ending. The original Jonny Quest never received the kind of finale modern audiences expect. There was no final battle. There was no emotional speech. There was no last goodbye. Instead, the series ended with The Sea Haunt, a normal adventure episode that happened to be the last one produced during the original run. The real reason the show stopped had little to do with storytelling. It came down primarily to production costs and television economics. But the lack of closure ultimately helped the series endure. Because the Quest team never officially completed its journey, every new generation could imagine that another mission was waiting. Reruns introduced the original episodes to millions of later viewers. The 1986 revival resumed the adventures. Television movies expanded the classic world. The real adventures of Jonny Quest reinvented the concept. Comics continued finding new stories to tell. The original series simply completed one mission, sailed away, and left the next adventure waiting for someone else. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.